Welcome back to Marsh Minutes. I am here with a good friend of mine, Logan Seidlik. He is now known as Logo Guy Logan. That's kind of a mouthful, but what he does is he's a graphic designer, website designer who focuses on the design side of things, and he's known as the guy who does logos. So, welcome. Thanks for coming on, Logan.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me, Shay. I'm going to do my own intro, the one that you just sort of flubbed. Uh, and it's also largely because I couldn't get Instagram handles. So I'm sort of mid rebrand right now. And Logo Guy Logan is sort of the placeholder until the people that are sitting on Logo Logan drop it. So the new one will be logologan.com is coming very, very soon.
Is that something you want to talk about now? Is that going to be something they can use as ammunition? Like, oh, this guy really wants this. And not like they're going to see this episode anyway.
Oh, I think each of them on every social platform has all of 2 followers. So I'm just like waiting until things sort of even out. But yeah, the Logo Guy Logan thing is a little bit of a mouthful, but it's a placeholder for right now.
That's okay. Despite kind of running this scuffed show, I am not super good at talking a lot of the time. At least I know how to pronounce your name because we're friends and we've been friends for quite a while. We do a lot of work together on several projects, but never working for the same company.
Yeah.
And I think what you do and what I do, on the marketing side of things, the analytics, and what you do on the design and branding, like it meshes really well with how we're able to collaborate on projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, the sort of vast majority of what I do is I describe it as logo and brand design. So essentially any branded piece of visual communication, although I've done content writing and that sort of thing, dabbled here and there in sort of other branded pieces. But the vast majority of it is the visual side. And then, yeah, that comes in a little bit of the web development or development. That's not my area. Yeah. Design and like social media design, all that visual fun stuff that is our entire lives right now as we're all, well, not locked inside anymore, but slowly emerging into the sunlight again.
Well, and when I started working with you and just kind of like knowing who you were, I think I might have reached out to you to grab a coffee because we'd known each other from prior companies we'd worked at. And I'm like, hey, Logan, I kind of know this dude. Maybe we should go grab a coffee or something. And I just knew you as a dude who does logos. And that might seem like a very disparaging way to kind of describe, because I think logos are very important. And I think what happens is that actually leads into the whole concept of branding and brand design.
Yeah. Well, I think logos are probably one of the most misunderstood pieces of graphic design that are out there. I think that you either have people extremely overvaluing or extremely undervaluing them. And it sort of depends on the level that the company that's working with them is at. So I know a lot of people who are just starting out small companies, they'll go on to something like a Fiverr or any of those sort of marketplaces and throw $10 at somebody to have something that works and they can use for now. And then there is the extreme opposite end of that, where there's a company like BP, where they have a hilariously high graphic design bill on a logo. It's like something like $25 million for something that is probably uglier than used to exist. So the way that I always go back to, there's a logo designer I admire very, very much by the name of Sagi Haviv. And he defines logos as there's sort of like 3 guiding principles to whether or not it passes muster and is a useful thing. So it has to be simple, it has to be distinct, and it has to be appropriate. And I think that when you go onto the sort of Fiverr scale, the lower end, you'll pass maybe 1 or 2 of those 3 checks, but very rarely do you pass all 3. And then I think that on the extreme end of it, you can sort of really live deeply in sort of the meaning that can be baked into a logo. It needs to tell this story, and it needs to be these things, and do all of this stuff. And a good logo should essentially operate as a handshake. It's like an introduction to the values of the brand that you're dealing with. So an example I always go to is Pepsi. Like, everybody can conjure the Pepsi logo in their brain. It's sort of red, white, blue circle. That thing means nothing in and of itself. Like, if you just saw that without any context, it's just a nice little simple graphic. But you can sort of add in all of your brand values just by sort of using it a bunch of times. And I think that people make the mistake of, again, they go too cheap or they go too expensive. And too expensive, they're trying to bake in way too many of their values into what is essentially a simple graphic that's sort of like used to identify something. And then on the low end, you have something like a complicated illustration you see on a lot of people's signs or as their logo. And if it's something that's sort of complicated and a big drawing like that, it doesn't operate in that simple space where it's like you could easily identify what it is and what it's trying to do. So the conversation, I try to have it in that middle space where it needs to work for what it needs to do. It needs to identify you from your competition and in a way that's memorable. And if we meet those criteria, we're doing a great job.
I think it works in the same way because I started out in outdoor billboard advertising, and same with digital advertising. Anytime you're doing digital visual static, you have to operate things in 10 words or less. And what you do with logos is you even have less to work with. You have to convey things with just color, shapes, and sometimes a couple of letters.
Well, it's sort of a blessing and a curse. To like, I always talk about sort of the distinction between art and design, and I think that's sort of really prevalent in something like this, where it's like design must do something. So it's like there is a goal first, and then a visual comes second. And a logo is a very, very sort of distilled version of that. So like you said, you have limited space. It needs to work in a million different applications. So does it work as the tiny little favicon on your browser? And does it work on a gigantic billboard? And it's like working with those extreme scales. It's like, can it do those things? So it has to do it first and then look pretty second. Whereas I think that art exists in the exact opposite space. Like you can make something that is sort of visually appealing that is artistic. And then you can you have the viewer apply things like meaning to it after the fact. But a piece of design, and especially something as sort of simple as a logo design, where, like you said, there's very serious constraints on sometimes. It's about getting the user to do a thing, and then if it looks great, it'll sort of be as a result of good design and like paying attention to those goals, rather than making something purely aesthetic and hoping that will draw people in.
I love how you brought up favicons, because how many people actually have those on their website? It's crazy. The amount of times I just see the default WordPress favicon, and I'm like, that's an easy, quick change you need to do. And like, we're going to do that right now. Here, I'll send you the favicon. I've done that to people too. It's like, and in the worst way possible, I'll take their logo, drop it down to 25 by 25, send it to them. Here, add this onto the back end of stuff. But sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. When you're compressing things way down, and actually, even when you're talking about digital ads, where we're talking about literally under 100 pixels or 200 pixels or whatever that might be, that logo has to scale. You need to be able to identify that without having something huge on the side of a bus or whatever that might be, however it's going to be blown up. Like the practicality of them is all over the place. And the thing about logos that's crazy to me, if I work quarterly with an advertising campaign and that doesn't work, I can change it, or I can adjust it, or I can remove it entirely. Logos have a longer shelf life, a much longer shelf life.
Hopefully.
Well, and it's not necessarily like if you've done your job, but that's an investment that you have to put in there. And there's also the brand recognition of an ad. You don't want to change, you can change your ad as much as you want. You don't want to change your logo. That's an identity.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of those things that has come up quite a bit, because the applications used to sort of primarily be print. So if you're working with a big company, it's like, does it work on the pen that they have, and then the building as well? And it was not limited so much in scope, but sort of with the addition of a bunch of digital asset requirements, what this thing can go on and sort of needs to work on sort of expanded from maybe it's these 50 items to it is any infinite number of items as the digital space expands. And I think that a lot of people didn't consider what their logo looked like as an avatar for their Instagram account or their Facebook. And it's one of those things that at the front end of a logo project or any branding project, you want to be asking those questions early. And it goes back to the sort of goal-based way that design works. I think that one thing that surprises a lot of people when they work with me for the first time is how much of a delay there is between starting the project and us actually doing some level of like highly customized work, because I'm very meeting heavy. I'm very involved in defining that problem and figuring out how we can tackle it with that visual. Because like you said, especially with something like a logo, if we're doing this once, ideally we're doing it now, and then we can refine it in 10 years, or even longer than that. If it's like trying to bake in a timeless quality is something you should always be attempting, especially with something that is as definitive of the business as the logo is. It's like you need to be adding as much emphasis on that as you would be like naming the company, or even like think of it as naming a child. You're doing this once, and then they're just going to have to live with this thing. And it's obviously you can change things around a little bit more in the visual design space, but what you want to be thinking is as long term as you can. And sort of as a result of that, and I guess we'll go with the flip side of it here, there are certain companies or projects that like people approach me for logo design and things like that, and I have to sort of tell them that they're not ready yet, because the last thing you want to do is invest that much time and effort into a company vision or a design vision that isn't even fully formed yet. So if somebody doesn't know who their customer is, that's sort of like a big flag for me, because we don't want to make something that speaks to a certain customer base that could change in 3 months. So if people have a definitive answer to a question like that, I know it's sort of, we've passed muster. We can move forward and sort of plow through onto this project. And then secondary to that, when I'm talking about sort of the magnitude of the places that this stuff needs to go, you're seeing a rise in something that I think Michael Barut of Pentagram Design is the first person I heard say it. I don't know if he's the founder of this term, but like a logo system rather than a solitary logo. And that's something that sort of takes into account the facets that are required for digital stuff. So can the logo sort of morph and change in a way that makes sense for all of the pieces, and to sort of remain consistent that way, and like trying to figure all of that stuff out as early as you possibly can. And there's like a bunch of wonderful case studies and things like that, where it's about, again, planning for that future and thinking of things like, how do we animate the logo? How does it interact with brand photography? All of that sort of stuff is things you want to be considering as early as you can, I guess is the best way to do it. And like structuring it more as a system solution rather than a single graphic solution.
Yeah. I liked what you said earlier about you saying you're not ready for a logo yet. I don't think that's something that happens very often, and it should happen a lot more. Is if we're in a situation to say no, you're not ready, we shouldn't try to push it just for the sake of making a buck or something like that. And I would like to say that that's an admirable thing, but you and I both know that that's also something that helps mitigate some of the issues that we run into, and it saves us a lot of hassle too. And quite often what will happen is they will go, okay, I wasn't aware of this. I'm going to go back in. I'm going to sort my stuff out. I'm going to come back to you guys, and it's going to be a much simpler situation for all parties involved.
Well, and it leads back, and I'll probably be repeating myself over and over again. So apologies, listener or watcher. But one of the things that you always want to return to is that goal-based structure, because the most important thing about that is if a project, specifically in the visual space, has goals, then you can easily define success, or you can define success in some way, where it's like, if there is something that is like, we need this thing to look good. What is the success point of that? So it looks good, now what? Like, are customers recognizing you outside of the fact that it's just something that looks nice? And it's something that you want to, well, at least I try to bring to every design project, where in the early days, we want to be having the most discussion we can about what a success point is. Like, we did this right if this happens. And I think having that happen as early as visual design is definitely something you want to be considering as much as you can. And yeah, talking about sort of aligning client expectations and your own deliverables. The earlier you can do that sort of thing, the better. And I have yet to have an instance where it is bad that I've been like, look, maybe we're not ready. More often than not, it just, as a result of asking those sort of hyper-specific questions, clients will go off, they will answer those questions, and then they will come back and be like, look, we have defined some more criteria. I think now we're ready to do this thing. because, like you said, the last thing I want to do is be spending somebody else's money for something that has no definable success criteria.
I feel like whenever I'm hired on a job, I'm not hired to be a yes man. Like, I'm not here to make you feel good about yourself. I'm here to help you with your product, and market that and get that out to people. And it's the same thing, right? Like, I would appreciate, if I was bringing someone on, to have them lay out every single problem that might arise, and then we can work through it together, rather than,
Yeah.
hey, sorry, we're kind of SOL here, but thanks for paying me, and move on to the next guy, right? You have to build those long-standing relationships, and it's kind of crazy how you approach things, even as someone who will design, a logo, right? Logo's a one and done type of thing, or at least it should be. But I know that you've established more relationships with the companies that you've worked at, and in circles, and you're recognized for that stuff that you do. So do you feel like that's part of your process that's helped you maintain that relationship, instead of just, you send me $250, I'll put 2 circles on a page and put your name on there?
I think, again, the biggest goal that I want to sort of tick off is sort of meeting those 3 criteria I laid out earlier. And then I think if we do a good job of that, something I always bake in to any project, say I'm hired for a logo design. During that process, I will be attempting to make things with that design that maybe aren't necessarily part of the scope and deliverables, but are part of doing the job correctly. So like it used to be in the old days, you would mock up, we need a business card and we need a stationery.
Stick it on a t-shirt.
All that sort of stuff. And it's one of those things where it's more important to have digital assets now. But I'm always making those other things sort of in the background. So if I'm starting a new logo project, I'm mocking it up on those items. Like, I'm figuring out what a design for a business card could look like, what a design for a t-shirt could look like. What does it look like on a billboard that they may never actually buy? But figuring that out early, I'll always sort of include, if we're doing like a branding guide, which I try to include on all projects, just to be like, here are the rules of the logo. Because essentially what you're doing when you're defining a brand is just creating a rule set, which is the boring part of design. But it's something I like the most. But I'll always sort of include maybe some mock-ups of things like that, where it's like, here is applications that this could go on, just to sort of get client wheels turning. And on the one hand, it's an upsell on my end. It's like, look at all the other nice things we could do. But it also is a way of like showing how much thought has gone into the construction of this piece. And that sort of helps facilitate that extra relationship, where if a client needs something else, they know that I have thought about this thing a large amount. So it's very easy for them to go, look, we saw that you have some sort of mocked up t-shirt design in this deck. We're thinking about getting t-shirts made for employees or something like that. Let's sort of riff on that idea a little bit more. And it's a good way of sort of keeping that door open, because it's not an intimate relationship, but it is like a more intimate relationship that I have with sort of the beginning of a business, because I'm helping define it visually. So if I do that well, clients should be coming back to sort of ask for more stuff, or ask for even opinions on, we're thinking of doing this. We're working with a company who's sort of outside of Logan's scope. Maybe it's a videography company or something like that. What is your opinion of this video they're putting together? And it's, keeping the door open. I always want to maintain healthy relationships with clients.
And Logan,
so that
do you have
feel
opinions?
comfortable that way?
Do you have opinions?
Me?
Yeah.
None. I've never had an opinion in my whole life. No, I have always. I'm the largest part of like a designer's life is the critique stage of design, where it's like, I will create something that I hate, because everything I make I hate initially, because the critic that lives in my brain wants to just pick it apart every step of the way.
Yeah.
And then eventually I'll get it to a place where I'm happy-ish with it, and then the client will be happy with it, and then I'll be refining small details they would never notice beyond that point. But yeah, speaking with other design people is a great way to sort of scare the opinions sort of into you and out of you at the exact same time, because it's being harsh early is always a good thing. what is it? I can't remember whose quote it is, but fail early is one of the sort of core tenets of like building a thing or creating a product or making a design piece.
Yeah.
Is that you want to know the incorrect decisions you're making as soon as you possibly can in order to correct them.
Yeah. Like going to the whole situation around like you designing for every single possible product, whether it's print or digital, anything like that. Anyone who says that, oh, everything's just digital, discounting the fact that there still are print, that it does exist. There are still going to be times where there's stationery or postcards, newspaper ads. There are still newspapers. People are disingenuous if they say that people aren't looking at those. So it's great to see that there are still people who are focused hard in on that. Because a lot of times when I'm meeting with other designers or other things, they're so hard-nosed on, oh no, we're just designing this for whatever. Or you get those guys who are like, radio is all the way to go because that's dependent on my paycheck. And like I don't work with radio, but I've written scripts for radio. I've helped listen to some people's radio programs, and that's all part of being part of the marketing circle and being in that trust factor. So like if someone's having you look at a video, well, they're like, okay, well, he understands how his side of things work. I could extract a little bit of an opinion out of him or a little bit of information, insight that's going to be helpful regardless.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to pull quotes because that's just what I'm going to do.
That's you. I wouldn't expect any otherwise, right?
There is another designer that I greatly admire, that Massimo Vignelli, who said, if you can design one thing, you can design everything. And it's something that I sort of think about quite a bit because sort of the locus of that idea is that all of the sort of core principles are the same. So if you have that goal-based approach, it's just the goals are sort of changing. And the ways to get to a successful product are always the same. It's just you have to learn a new medium. Whether that, like we touched a little bit on, I would never say that I'm primarily a web designer, but it's something I started doing at a web design agency, and have just carried on a little bit as I go. And it's one of the same things. It's what does the customer need to do? What are the goals of use case A? And sort of mapping all that out and putting a lot of thought into defining customer experience. And that's true whether you're making a logo, building a website, designing a chair. Like all of those things are exactly the same in that they have clearly defined success sets and goal sets. And it's just a matter of making sure that you understand the moving parts enough to sort of make the thing. Hopefully that made some level of sense.
No, it does. Like you keep bringing out quotes and talking about like specific designers. Who's the big guy with the trucker hat and the beard and always has moleskin notepads on?
Oh, he would be very unhappy if he heard this because it's Field Notes. It's his
Field
brand.
Notes. Oh, okay.
And you're thinking of Aarondraplin.
That's the guy. Yeah.
Yes. One legend, absolute legend.
So you're a fan of him. He's not, you don't think he's overrated or anything?
No, I think that he speaks to a very specific subset, and it's being from Saskatchewan, this actually speaks to me a lot. But he is a big proponent of like working class design, which is like even like when I talk about goal-oriented design, there is a level of sort of floweriness that I apply to most projects in order to like maybe upscale them a bit or to like make it a little high-end looking. And he's very much about utilitarian design in that like thick lines is one of the big things he talks about over and over again. And it's just like a logo can be something as simple as a triangle made of 3 lines, and it's identifiable. You can see it from a million miles away, and it's for like a truck shop. And it's like they're not thinking as much about their brand. It's just more about it being like selling that strength and being effective. But yeah, I've got his book right over here.
I wasn't sure what was going to happen when I brought him up, because there's a lot of gurus in digital marketing, especially marketing anyone, who are just full of shit. I recognize that. People in the industry recognize that, and it's good to hear that he's not one of those guys. But sorry, you have one of his books. He's got several, I think.
I think maybe there's a second one. I know he's got one called Pretty Much Everything. So I don't know how you make a sequel to that book. everything else, I guess maybe you call it. But yeah, it's one of those things that, and not to sort of toot the horn of my industry, but if you cannot do the thing, people stop hiring you to do the thing.
That's fair.
And it becomes very apparent very quickly. And like when you have something like a body of design work, even if you are doing design work with no end client, you can sort of illustrate the skill required in constructing something like that. So I think it's not so much a problem in my community, at least that I've noticed, where you have people sort of evangelizing on behalf of things they cannot do. There's a lot less sort of etherware without case studies.
Yeah.
I think that, and it's sort of reflected in any graphic designers applying for a design job in most cases. It's like, have a resume, that's fine. We couldn't really give a shit. So it proves to us you went to school and did some things. Now show us case studies.
Yeah.
Show us clients that you
show us work.
with. Like I want to talk to happy people that paid you to do a thing.
Yeah.
And it's much more important. And as a result of that, you have, well, it's probably true in most digital industries like yours as well, that the ability to teach yourself how to do this job has become easier and easier the longer I've done it. So the tools to create social media posts for your business, like when I started, there wasn't a Canva. It didn't exist. And now it's one of the easiest tools out there. If you have a basic understanding of design, you can put together consistent visual social media posts for your own business.
Yeah.
And again, people are learning on that. They're getting into the industry quicker. And it's one of those things where if you can do the work, if you can make something that looks good and is successful, like more power to you. And I think that if you can't, and if you're out there just talking about all the great stuff you can do, you'll fade away and people will stop listening because there's no work to back it up.
Yeah. Well, so kind of speaking of people stop paying you, one thing that you're a big proponent of is trying to help small business or freelancers actually get paid for their work. And this is something you and I have talked about a lot. And that's not really an issue that I necessarily run into a lot, but I know a lot of people who do struggle with that. And you have a cool project. I don't think you're ready to like kind of talk about it, but kind of lay some stuff out. Where's your thought plan on this whole issue that we struggle with as freelancers?
Sweet segue. We definitely didn't plan this before.
No. We're kind of running out of time, and I know we could talk like forever.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
you're going to be on again soon. We'll talk more logo stuff.
No, for sure. The biggest thing, I'm working on a project with a friend of mine. I'm not going to do name dropping or anything like that, just to sort of discuss the sort of idea broadly. And it's something
Elon
that
Musk.
I've run into. Yes, me and Elon are going to space. No, I have a friend who's a lawyer, and I am a creative person, and we went to high school together. That feels like ages ago now. We're all old people. Although I read very young. But we've been looking for sort of ways to work together for a really long time. And I think that there is a gap in the creative space to give sort of creative people the tools to have a proper legal discussion. And I think the biggest part of protecting and getting people paid is having some level of legal literacy, in the same way that like business skills are incredibly important. And I know design schools are not talking about this, or at least not the ones I fucking went to. They don't put the emphasis on those pieces. It's like, if you can do the job, and like we spoke about, if you can present those case studies, that's fantastic. But if you want to be in business for yourself, like there are mediocre designers that make a lot of money because they're good at the business side. And they have the know-how to sort of protect themselves and make sure they're getting paid for these things. So what we're working on, me and my lawyer friend of mine, is something to help bridge that gap for creative people. Something that makes client negotiation on something as simple as a contract for creative work very, very easy and very intuitive, and something that even a layman can do, layman or laywoman can do, and get it to a place where there's some level of understanding. Because I think it's a really scary space to be presented with like a document of legalese that you don't know how to read, and your client definitely doesn't know how to read, and you'd both have to hire legal departments to make any sense of. Just sort of creating a tool that helps bridge that gap and allows people to sort of speak in plain English to each other in order to come to an agreement, do business the way most small businesses do, and then make sure that both parties are protected. And we're working on that and trying to sort of back it and make it enforceable legally too. So that's why we've got a lawyer on staff already, and yeah, we're hoping to change the world with this thing.
That's the most important part. It's crazy how you, who we've established as the logo guy, all of a sudden goes on, I'm going to call it a crusade to try
without
to
the murder, trying to do almost no murder on this.
I'm thinking like Batman Crusade, right? Cape Crusader kind of thing, where you're going and you're fighting against the injustice of people not getting paid, and just based on the trials that you've had. It's cool how we can use any kind of experience that we have and whatever insight, knowledge, and aptitude we have otherwise to be able to make something. And I've been kind of following the project. You've brought me in on a couple of things just to test the waters and get my thoughts on things, and it's cool. I'm excited about it.
Yeah.
I think, since you're not ready to like share anything right now, I appreciate you talking a little bit about it, but I am going to
I'm passionate about that specific thing, and whether or not I was working in the space myself to try and solve the problem, it's important to me that if anyone is listening to this who's thinking of becoming a designer or doing anything creative, just making sure that part of it is in their mind. Like, look into contracts, get yourself protected, make sure that the people that are agreeing to do work with you are agreeing on paper, and that everyone is protected and getting paid. And I think that a lot of people ignore that section. They get excited about doing fun creative work, and it's important to do that thing and get excited about your job and delivering fantastic products to fantastic customers. And knowing that in most cases, people aren't out to get each other. We just need to define what on earth this work is, so that everyone is getting exactly what they expected.
It never
it's hyper important.
ceases. It never ceases to amaze me how many people just think that you can do work and then they just decide not to pay you. When I was growing up, it's like, I want this. Okay, well, get your wallet out, pay for it. It's like, okay, that I understand that. That's the society that we live in. That's the transaction. We base all of our society on, I get this because I paid for it. And it's crazy how many times that people just kind of say, yeah, I'm just not going to pay you. And they probably get away with it quite a lot.
Well, and I try not to ascribe malice to any things like that. So like, if something comes up in which, and I think anyone who does creative work has had this occur, they're like, the client is like, for some reason or another, we're not happy, we're not paying. I have to look at that as, at some point along the way, expectations were mismatched. So it is not necessarily that they are out to get you or anything like that. It's just that what was delivered was not necessarily what was expected in most cases. Like, obviously there's bad actors that are going to abuse the system like that. But I think that in as many steps from the beginning of the project to the delivery of whatever you're doing, you can sort of make sure that those expectations are aligned, and that at every point, both client and designer, or client and photographer, client and SEO expert, know exactly what it goes back, it sort of bookends it really nicely. It goes back to that goal-oriented stuff. If those goals are defined early, you have a piece of paper that says what those goals are. Along the way, you've had your check-in points that sort of reinforces that goal-based structure. Then at the end of it, it's very hard for somebody to say, this is not worth what we agreed to, because you've spent the time to make sure that whole process references back to the initial agreement in this case. And I think that sometimes, like I said, people get lost in the work itself. They want to make something cool and give it to a client. And maybe it's because they focus too much on the visual aspect. Maybe it's because the goal was different by the end. It's all about sort of communicating those touch points and making sure there's something you can point to that's like, look, here's how we defined this project. Here is how I solved this problem. And here is the amount we agreed on. And it's, again, this is the boring end of the design world, but it's the most important if you are intending to make some sort of a living there and keep happy clients too. because the last thing you want to do is have somebody angry and not paying you. And I just refuse to be one of those people that blame clients 100% for things like that. I think that it has to be a breakdown along the way that everyone in the relationship is responsible, at least somewhat for. And it's about sort of identifying those things and solving those problems early.
Well, that's I think that's you being good guy, Logan. That's a nice way to look at it. Not saying that I don't agree, but it's cool that you're approaching things in that way. But for this project and kind of anything going forward, I have your social in there as at Logo Guy Logan, and I know that's probably going to change. Let me know. I can change the liner notes, everything. I can't change the overlay. That's going to be here. It's going to be stuck forever. You have to live with that.
Totally fine. Maybe they'll never give up those handles, and I'm just stuck with this one.
Well, you kind of wish, right? I've been looking for a lot of Marsh ones for quite a while. Now, the other thing, too, is I will have you back, and I probably will have you back with your partner to talk about this more when it is something more to present. And I don't think you're too far away from that, correct?
We're getting there. We're working. It's one of those things where we sort of started tackling this thing over the summer months, and it's just
as
the
soon
world
as you
is
involve...
finally being regular again, and it's just one of those things where we're making the progress we can, and we're a 3-partner situation now. We have design, we have legal, and then we've got technology too.
Wonderful.
So yeah, we're working with probably. Of course, I'm going to say this, but they're the best team for this particular project. And yeah, once we have something to talk about that's sort of more clear, I would be happy to come back with the whole team, with just Logan and legal, with anything you want to do. I'm happy to discuss it and get it out there.
Well, you're going to be updating things, I think, on your social. That's going to be there. I appreciate you coming on, man. It won't be the first or last time, only time, whatever.
I would hope it's the first, because I wasn't here if there was one before this.
That's very true. It's been a long week already. I'm surprised I got through this 30 minutes as it is. But hey, man, I appreciate being on again. Thank you. All your stuff is going to be in the liner notes, and if anyone has any questions, you can reach them there. And thank you, everyone, for staying tuned, watching.
Yeah, thank you, everybody, for listening and watching and doing whatever you do. And yeah, social Logo Guy Logan and lscreative.ca is my website with all of my fun case studies and all that good stuff.
Yes, that's going to be on there too. Actually, you said you're updating your website too, right?
Yeah, it'll all be. I'm mid rebrand. I probably should have waited to do this thing, but
it's okay. I appreciate you being on now. So thanks again, Logan. We'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Have a great one.